We have Anton Evers, who is a technical architect at Adobe. Like, this guy's career goes way back. Like, there's so much stuff that I could talk about in terms of what he's been doing. Anton specializing in large international Magento 2 implementation and migration. So if anybody know about migration, you know what that is very complicated. So this guy has the finger on the pulse. Anton, I know it says here you have like over 35 Magento implementation and designs and build over 100 Magento 2 modules. And from looking at all the different modules we'll install, I'm like, wow, that's a lot. so I know you have been a really good contributor to the Magento community. There's loads of core product that you contribute to as well in terms of Magento. I know you're part of Adobe. So just I want to make sure that I give you people the full details of how good this talk is going to be. So Anton, over to you.
Thanks. So good afternoon. Thanks for being here. I am Anton Evers. 4 years ago, I followed my wife's career and moved to Bangladesh. And when I started living there, I took 3 weeks off from work to settle and to get over the initial culture shock. By then, my wife already started working. And after 1 week of sitting at home in an empty apartment, I got terribly bored. And I had worked with Magento stores for over 6 years then. So I had seen plenty of ways to improve the platform. So I opened my laptops and for my laptop, and for 2 weeks straight, I wrote improvements and bug fixes. And so many of them were approved that I was worldwide #2 contributor of the month. But I had so much fun working together with the community maintainers and the Magento staff that I decided to apply for a job with Magento. And because of that, moved back to the Netherlands. And indeed, now I am a technical architect at Adobe Consulting Services for 3 years now. So today I would like to share a story with you about an engagement where I repurposed static code analysis tools to give a high-level project planning recommendation to company executives and to provide them with clear and measurable path forward to meet their goals. So it's August 2020. I'm just back in the Netherlands. Outside it's 28 degrees, but inside my attic apartment, it is 38 degrees. And I'm sitting at my dining table, which is now my office. 9 pigeons are staring at me from the windowsill. A few weeks ago, it seemed fun to feed them out of lockdown boredom, and they've been here ever since. But now I've just finished a 1.5 year long assignment, and I'm onboarding onto a new project. So my client plans on merging 24 existing Magento stores into a shared code base, and that is called a global reference architecture. They're asking me to do a full code review of the existing stores because they want to know what they're up against. It's not the development team asking, but the company executives. And they already suspect differences between the stores, but what does that actually mean for the project planning? Now, at consulting services, I do a lot of code reviews all the time, so it's nothing new, and it can be very fun, in fact, but it does require a lot of focus, and it's not something to do weeks on end. I'm hoping for a fairly small code base, something like 20% custom, 80% native. So when I discovered the beast under the hood, you can imagine it being 38 degrees, that I was starting to sweat it. At consulting services, we have developed a tool which estimates how much time you need for a manual review based on the code complexity and size. And that tool reported a terrifying 162 modules, totaling 219 workdays and 5 hours of manual review time. By this time, I'm starting to doubt whether a manual code review is actually the right approach. Not in the last place, because I don't want to do it at all. Of course, I don't need to review every single module, but still, that cannot possibly be what the client expects. So I need to find a shortcut here. Now, Magento is very modular, and so are customizations to Magento. These modules are all very similar in structure, or at least they should be. Now, they're built out of the same basic building blocks, and they follow certain conventions. Automation might be my shortcuts. Magento developers use automated tools already to check whether they are following conventions. You can think of them as specialized spell and grammar checks. Some are exactly that. They literally check for correct interfunctional alignment in the code. And some are looking for possible bugs. Some are checking if you are not combining too many responsibilities into a single piece of code. These tools cannot replace a full manual code review, I'm aware, but they might be able to help me answer the questions that my client has. So I went off the grid for 3 weeks, and by the end, I came up with a 10-step journey towards answering my client's questions in less than 219 days. And I will take you on the same journey. So step 1, discover which questions need to be answered. In my case, the client is asking for a code review, and a code review is a solution to a problem. When a client asks for a solution, I always want to know what they will be using it for. So which problem are they trying to solve? And someone once told me, good communication is talking past each other as closely as possible. I don't assume that I interpret things exactly the same way as my client from the start. And I'd like to illustrate that with an analogy. So suppose someone is asking you to build a house. Now you say, of course, you build a house, and your clients want windows on the sides. So you add windows on the sides. They want a window on the roof, so you add a skylight. And then they want a couch that doubles as a bed. Okay, strange, but all right. Now they want to be able to take that house with them on a holiday, and they want you to put wheels underneath the house. So what you should have built was a caravan. And assuming that you understood each other at the start, you've built an actual house and you need to start over completely. So I make sure that I know which problem exactly they're trying to solve, and I do that by asking to explain the obvious. In this case, after I finish the code review, which questions do you expect me to answer? In my case, there were these types of questions behind the ask for a code review. So the questions were, should I merge my code bases at all? Or should I start over completely? Where can I expect challenges or risks? And can we get more clarity on scope and phases? And with these questions, we can move to step 2. Step 2 is, do you need to build anything at all? I'm working on a Magento code base that is new to me, and that might not always be the case. I might be already familiar with the code. It might be my own code, in fact. And that way I might be able to answer the questions right away. On the other hand, I might wonder if it's that wise to self-assess. At least building a tool can help me be more impartial. And there are also already products on the market that I could use to answer questions about the health of a Magento store. Adobe offers a free security scan, and there's the site-wide analysis tool, or SWOT, which used to be available only for Magento Cloud, but now is available to all Adobe Commerce users. And dependent on the questions that I need to answer, that can already be enough. And then I don't need to build anything. But in this case, I wanted to be more thorough and more specific. Step 3, break down the questions into measurable units. So let's go over the questions one at a time. I created a mind map to map out which code characteristics are connected to a question. So my client was asking, should I merge the code bases at all, or should I start over completely? And I asked myself, when should you be careful merging code bases? You should be careful when there are many differences between different code bases. So they might differ much in functionality or quality, or the teams might be working in completely different ways. Now, functional differences are not that easy to measure automatically. I mean, you could look at layout file names and determine where they have an impact, but that will only tell you so much. So probably my client will know the functional differences already. So let's leave this one out for now, come back to it later. The quality differences can be measured very well. So quality pointers can be to-do comments, lack of tests, messy code style, lacking code documentation, syntax errors, lack of service interfaces, direct use of object managers, excessive module size, interdependence, tight coupling. So any single one of these would be suggestive at best, but if you take them all together, they can tell you a story. Now, I know how to measure quality differences. How can I measure if teams are working in different ways? If I run the same tests on two different code bases, I can see if the outcome is very different. If it is, the teams might have different standards or methodologies, and I can later validate that by asking my client, of course. My client next question was, where can I expect challenges or risks? So finding units with measurable units with challenging or risky topics when merging code together. So the risk is the average quality of the stores combined could be too low. So if I've already determined, by the way, quality indicators for the previous question, so I'm using them here as well. But another risk is, suppose that a single functionality is spread across multiple modules. So how can I make sure that I merge the entire functionality into the new store? And again, modules that are highly interdependent can be a sign of a risk in that area. Excessive module size can be a challenge. This will make it hard to determine all of the modules' responsibilities. So instead of having a single functionality spread across modules, you could have a lot of functionalities in a single module, and that is also can be determined by size, which is a measurable unit. Lack of tests is a risk and a challenge. The risk is that merged stores will contain errors, and it will be harder to ensure that it still works after the merge. But the challenge is recognizing the code's responsibilities, because test cases can tell me what a module is supposed to do, and without them, I might need to read the entire program. Unconventional module structure is a risk. It makes merging or upgrading Magento stores hard. If one store has conventional module structures, the other one is unconventional, then the combined result will be unconventional too and hard to upgrade. And that means that the store might miss security upgrades in the future, because stores that are hard to upgrade tend to postpone upgrades. Rewriting a lot of native Magento code is a risk. If done in the wrong way, this can also make the store harder to upgrade. You might override code first, that changes in a later upgrade, and the risk is that the override doesn't contain the upgraded code. And now you're missing new functionality. All right, so there's plenty to measure. Next question is, can we get more clarity on scope and phases? So I want to deliver a project in phases. Then I probably need to divide it by functionality. So for instance, start with payment methods, shipping method, specific catalog enhancements, or fulfillment integration. Those are all separate functionalities I would want to deploy. And the easiest way to merge these separately is with a code base that is highly modular, but not highly interdependent. If module A depends on code in module B, then I need to deliver both module A and B in order to get the full functionality of module A. And if B in turn depends on module C, I need to deliver 3 modules all at once. And this is the high interdependence that I can measure by counting module dependencies in the code. So project scope can be measured by module size and complexity as well. It can also be measured by intended use. If a module is used only in one country, it might not need to be in the initial version of your new store, and you could roll out stores by country. Modules that are used in all of the countries can be grouped together and determine the initial scope of your merge. By measuring module size, code complexity, and dependency, I will be able to formulate an answer to the scope question. So now we've broken down the questions into measurable units. Step 4 is to find existing tools to measure these units. And a couple of tools that I used in my analysis are PHP Code Sniffer with the Magento coding standards, which I can then use to detect cosmetic issues in the code. PHP Mess Detection is a tool that finds possible bugs and bad practices. PHP Stan can find compilation errors. PHP Dependency Analysis is just what it says to be. It detects dependencies. And PHP Unit measures test coverage and fail rate. And most likely there are other tools that I would find useful when answering other questions. The important thing here is that I'm looking for tools that help measure the units I defined earlier. I'm not looking for tools first. I do not determine what I will measure based on the tools I already know. I find the right tool for my purpose, and the purpose is defined first, not the other way around. Step 5, create your own tools to measure the rest. So before I start creating tools, I keep the goal in mind because it's very easy to go overboard here. For instance, I can measure test coverage, I can measure how many tests pass and fail, or I can simply measure if there are tests at all. I could just check if there is a tests folder in each module, and it would be very easy to write a program that outputs 1 if there is such a folder and 0 if not. And then that could be already enough for an analysis of test coverage, and it's exactly what I did in my case. I also decided to make another tool that looks for code dependencies because they appear in so many answers to questions. I want to get insight into module interdependence, regardless of explicit mentions of interdependence added by the developer. And there is already a tool that does exactly that, which is called Gerio Extension Checker, but that's not a static code analysis tool. It requires a functioning Magento environment, and it's a Magento module of its own. And in the next step, I'll explain why I want only tools that run outside of Magento. I based my custom tool off of the dependency analysis tool. This tool can list all external code that specific module depends on. And I then distinguish 3 types of dependencies. So internal, framework, and third party. Internal dependencies are the dependencies of other modules made by my client. Framework dependencies are dependencies on the Magento core product, and third party are everything else, including libraries. Magento dependencies are managed by the PHP package manager, which is called Composer. It's a separate system. So I look into the Composer log file and match Composer packages to class names using the namespaces to determine which Composer package name belongs to which Magento module. I compare those packages to the dependencies that are explicitly defined by the developer. And Magento has set up rules for defining Composer dependencies. When you plan for a Magento upgrade, you can see from the Composer dependency list where to expect issues in your modules. This only works if you follow these rules for defining Composer dependencies. And often Composer dependencies are incomplete or absent. With my tool, I can tell exactly which dependencies are not explicitly declared in every module. And it tells me how many dependencies a module has, regardless of what the developer wrote down explicitly. Failing to mention the dependencies can result in installing incompatible modules together as well. The outcome of my tool tells me something about how deliberately high interdependence is introduced. Also, the tool not only points out a problem, but also a solution direction. So the problem is high interdependence, and the start of the solution is making that explicit. From there, you can detach and isolate responsibilities in the code. Although this tool can help answer our questions right now for our client, it is useful on its own as well in continuous integration pipelines. When I build custom automation and custom tests, I make sure that I can use it in continuous integration pipelines. In this way, developers will know exactly what to improve if my measurements have a negative outcome. Not everything has to come from static analysis, though. I can also gather information about modules from my client and put that into a CSV file. I can then analyze both the code and the CSV file. For instance, I had a file that listed all of the modules together with the country codes where these modules were active. I can later combine these in my reporting and quantify them. And remember the functional differences from earlier. This is where they fit in too. I request functional impact areas per module from my client and add them in a CSV, which I will use in the analysis. Step 6 is then to combine the tests into a single program. Until now, I've collected and built tools that can analyze a single module. I would need to run all of them 162 times manually at this point. To aggregate and analyze data from all modules, I combine all of the tests into a single command line tool. I built the tool in a conventional way, using Symfony console application as a starting point, which I'm already familiar with because the Magento command line tool itself is also a Symfony console application. And I don't have to use Symfony console. I could also use Jenkins or similar, but that's a matter of personal preference. The command line tool then loops over all of the modules that I want to analyze. I used input parameters to point the tool to the right directories. And this way I can reuse the tool for multiple code bases that have modules in different places. The tool runs all of the tests on every module and collects the outputs from the tests. At this point, I want to parse the outputs and translate them to numeric data. The outputs are now still very specific, telling me, for instance, exactly which spelling errors I made in specific lines of specific modules, and I only need the amount of errors for my purposes. With PHP Code Sniffer, for instance, I'm only counting the occurrences of the word warning and error in the output of each module analysis and add up those numbers. I only use these numbers in the report that the Symfony console application outputs. So next to numeric data per module, I will also create a class that collects all of the totals and adds all of the numbers together. First, I create a plain text output to validate the results. And don't pay any attention to HTML formatting or stuff like that, because you just need to make sure that the output is structured at this point. Next, calibrate your test. So from the output of the tool, I can make out the extremes. I can take the best module, the worst module, and one in between. And with 3 modules, I do a high-level manual code review. And these are the only 3 modules I will be reviewing manually and not that extensively. But doing so helps give me meaning to the numbers, because I want to be able to answer the question, I see the numbers, but how bad is bad and how good is good? If some of the numbers seem exaggerated, I might want to give different weights to certain tests. Step 8, make it graphical. So now things are getting fun. This is where I can work on presentation. I used Grafana to capture the metrics. Grafana is a universal dashboard. It's free to use and it can run using Docker. It's fairly easy to send my metrics to Grafana every time I run the analysis. In Grafana, I can present my data in beautiful graphs, and I can create a dashboard that displays my report. I can create dashboards that display only a selection of data, or that display data in a slightly different way for different audiences. And this slide here is what it can look like, but I'm sure that any of you can make it even prettier. Step 9, now it's time to answer the questions. So I've collected all of my metrics, and it's time to go back to the initial questions. And this, in my case, this went to something like this. Should you merge your code bases at all, or should you start over completely? Your stores are generally in a good condition. There are differences in quality. Store A is slightly outdated, runs on an old Magento version. Modules of Store A might not be compatible with the other stores. Store B and C would be a better starting point. Most of the differences can be found in payment methods and shipping methods, but as these are region bound, there is no overlap and they should merge just fine. There are a couple of modules that are considerably worse off than others. This is a list of the modules. Problems are here, here, and here. We can recommend that you work on their quality before adding them to a global code base. Your catalog module is taking up 10% of the entire code base. We recommend you refactor this module and split it up into several modules, one for each responsibility. Our feeling is that merging the code bases will take considerable effort. However, most of your code is nicely divided by responsibility. It shouldn't be necessary to start over completely. Where can you expect challenges or risks? The major challenge will be your catalog module that needs to be cut up into several smaller modules. Also, you should upgrade your stores to the same Magento version before you start. This list of modules is considered risky. They are lacking tests. They have mixed responsibilities. We see known bad practices and a lot of to-do comments. They might have been built under high time pressure. Now would be the time to revise them in order to make them less risky. Can you get more clarity on scope and phases? Well, the catalog module is a risk for your planning. In the current form, you should merge all of an all or nothing. And merging everything all at once might lead to conflicting functionalities across stores being merged. Taking out these conflicts can take a long time in its current form. overall, the work that needs to be done to merge the catalog module with the other stores is unpredictable. Most of the other modules, though, are functionally separated, so you should be able to decide which ones you need for the first phase. We recommend starting with country B. The country has the least amount of active modules, and this is a list of modules that are active in all countries. Those should be in the initial version, and they comprise a total of 40% of the total effort. In my case, this was the level of detail that my client was looking for, and a full code review would definitely have been overkill. The key here is to tell a story with the numbers and not oversimplify. The numbers alone are not enough. Also, I'm transparent about the data that my advice is built on. And with 3 weeks of work instead of 219 days, the client has now a general feeling of what they're up against. A one-off report and a story is of course nice, but the real added value in delivering the measuring device with all of the measurements. So step 10 is to make it continuous. My tool specifically analyzes store merge readiness for their global reference architecture. In fact, my colleague codenamed this the Global Reference Architecture Readiness Analysis by Anton, in short, Granton. Based on the tool, my advice was to do some work before the client is ready to merge their stores. Grafana can visualize the change in your code over time if you make sure to automatically run the analysis on the development branch of your stores every night. Because of my recommendations, the executives now know what changes to look for in the dashboard. I can configure the targets as thresholds for color changes in a custom dashboard that displays the key metrics. As the code improves, numbers should go from red to green. When I translate my advice into KPIs, I can even configure alerts to be fired in specific conditions in Grafana. Also, I did not forget to include my custom-built tools into the client's CI pipeline, and that way the development team knows exactly where to make which improvements. So let's do a small recap. Step 1 is to discover which questions need to be answered. Is my client describing a solution or a problem? Step 2, do I need to build anything at all? I mean, can I answer my question with existing tools? And stop here. Step 3, break down the questions into measurable units. Use mind map to identify the units. Any single measurement is suggestive, but the more things you measure, the more complete a picture you draw. 4, find existing tools to measure these units. Don't reinvent the wheel. And 5, create custom tools to measure the rest. Don't go overboard. Simple is often good enough. Build the tests with continuous integration in mind. 6, combine the tests into a single program. Use a conventional framework such as Symfony console application and convert the tool output into numeric data. Step 7, calibrate your tests. Do a manual review of the best and the worst to understand the scope of your measurements. And based on the manual review, determine the weight of each test. Step 8, make it graphical. I used Grafana to visualize my measurements. Step 9, answer the questions. Tell the story behind the numbers. Don't oversimplify and be transparent about which test you used. And step 10, make it continuous. Schedule the analysis to run nightly. Turn KPIs into the thresholds in Grafana to keep track of progress, and integrate custom tools into continuous integration for the development team. And that's how I repurposed static code analysis tools to give high-level project planning recommendations to company executives and provide them with a clear and measurable path forward, including a measuring device to meet their goals.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Anton. There's so many things that I want to ask.
I can't imagine.
Oh gosh. So ring fencing a scope, right? Does these tools give you that where you can have, say, for instance, a preferred budget that a client wants to spend, and then because you have used this kind of analysis tool, it ring fences that budget and you can build to that exact budget? Is that possible?
Well, yeah, I wish it were. I mean, the least you can do is get a very, very rough understanding of a lot of code in a short amount of time. So you'll be able to give a high level estimation or a high level planning based on that. But you know, the specifics of a budget also come down to the experience of a team, for instance, or the location of a team. So there are always things outside of the code that influence financial scopes. Code-wise, however, definitely should be able to tell something useful about which things are definitely impossible or what might be a possibility.
I think we got a couple questions here. So are we able to make any of the tooling you develop available for others?
Yeah, I imagined that question would come. So a lot of the tools that I mentioned are already available. I cannot give you the exact tool that I created, not only because it's probably a proprietary code now, but also I imagine that you will have different questions than the ones that I needed to answer. So in fact, I expect you to select your own combination of tools and build it in maybe not even a single application, but maybe in Jenkins or some other container, whichever makes sense for you in the context of your client and the questions you need to answer. So, but those are all very generic tools. I mean, Symfony Console application and the tools I mentioned and Grafana, they're already out there, and the trick is just combining them in a way that answers your question specifically, and it creates a tool that can measure the answer to your specific questions time and again.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I think for us, it's one of them things where I guess if you have tools that can help you to answer the client questions faster, rather than spending that amount of time, it increase efficiency. Definitely, and then actually they know what they're signing up for, so that kind of cements you and kind of give you a good place to start when you come to actually development work.
Yeah, that makes work fun as well, right? Because you can be creative in how you interpret a certain question and make the work fun for you as well. In fact, it did definitely for me.
Yeah, I think from a development point of view, that I think that's kind of where you want to stay. You want to have that almost that where to go, and because you know that is going to be solving that particular problem. It's very much like you're on it from the start, right? You have that buy-in from the start, yes, as well as the client as well.
Yeah, in this case, I don't know if the client knew in advance what I was up to, because, you know, 3 weeks isn't that much, and then all of a sudden I had the answer there already. But yeah, I think it does make sense to give your client a heads up of what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. I don't imagine that clients will prefer the 219 days option over the 3 weeks.
Definitely. I know I wasn't. But no, I want to say thank you so much for coming through and actually presenting, because I know from my point of view, there are loads that I've taken away from that to build into how we actually go about planning as well. So I want to thank you again. It was a pleasure to have you here, and thank you so much, guys. So we're gonna have a bit of a break, and we're gonna come back at 3:20 for our next talk, which is going to be Mark Schultz. So, but once again, don't forget, there's loads of other network panels that you can go to. You can one-to-one somebody. I saw some Twitter feed of somebody just atting somebody and having a bit of a conversation, and it's really nice, right? So just reach out. Anton is here, so you can pick his brain just by having a one-to-one with him. You know, so that's good as well. As well as if there's any more questions, pop it into the chat. And Anton, please, if you don't mind, would you mind just replying to some people for us?
No problem.
Yeah,
absolutely.